What's in a name? A movie's title will often give us an idea as to what to expect from the movie as a whole, hinting at its plot or genre. Nightmare on Elm Street hints to it being a horror movie set on Elm Street. Star Wars hints to it being a sci-fi movie set in space during an interstellar conflict. And even if we don't see the poster or the trailer, we can get a good idea as to what to expect from the name alone, as they often accurately describe the whole experience. But what if I were to tell you that is not always the case? I'm Chris Hall, and today I bring you The Fast and the Furious. The Fast and the Furious is a high-octane thrill ride with eye-popping chase sequences and stunts. This Fast and the Furious, however, doesn't have those things, and has comparatively less. The Fast and the Furious is a 1959 crime drama directed by and starring John Ireland as Frank Webster and co-stars Dorothy Malone as Connie Adair. Connie is an aspiring race car driver who is kidnapped by Webster after she sees him beating up a fat policeman whilst waiting for pineapple juice at a roadside cafe. She was going to use her race car to enter a nearby race, but when Frank kidnaps her, he takes her race car to enter the race and during the race uses the race as cover to escape to Mexico. Along the way, he threatens and abuses her, whilst revealing the most ridiculous character revelation ever. Will Connie escape? Will Frank suffer an unspeakable, violent end? Well, I think of an interesting third question for all of this. The answer to all these things is no. With a title like Fast and Furious, you would expect this movie to be both Fast and Furious. Though sadly, this movie is less Fast and Furious, and is more slow and perturbed. Okay, so snide flippancy aside, this is a movie about a female racing driver and an escaped convict. Just that setup alone fills your mind with visions of high-octane thrills, of car chases, fist fights, getting into a bit of bother over a dodgy £5 note. And yes, whilst this is a movie filmed during the 50s, and any action within it was always going to be a little bit more reserved and laid back than latter-day action movies, you would expect some kind of excitement there, some kind of adventure, some kind of thrills, Fast and Furious in every way, shape and form. And having seen this movie 4 times for this review, I can confirm that this movie is lacking in all those things. There is no excitement, no intrigue, no car chases, no fist fights, no unfortunate misunderstandings, no enjoyment, no action. It's just so very cold and empty. Apart from the pre-title crash sequence, there is no real action or stunts within this movie, and the closest thing we get to a car chase isn't till the end of the movie, in which we have the big race, which I can confirm above all else is filled to the brim with suspense. Mostly because you don't know what's going on, you can't understand who's who. The problem is that this movie is filmed in black and white, and as such there are only 3 colours of car: black, white and grey. This race is less the Rainbow Road and more the monochrome alley. Because the cars are only in black, white and grey, and the fact they're moving so quickly you can't read the number painted on the side of them, it's hard to gauge who's who and what's going on. You don't know if our hero is winning or losing, you don't know if the villains just crashed out or not. You're left in this very odd, very confusing sequence which goes on for way too long, which means this entire sequence feels very much like the recent Transformers movies, in which it's just this very long, very noisy sequence which you're not entirely sure what's going on or who's winning or who's beating up who.
Entering turn number 7, Bucker is moving to the lead. Jensen second at 59 spins on, but he's all right. It's a very sharp turn and the boys are taking.
When we get down to absolute basics, this movie is, or at least it sets out to be, an action drama. The problem is the action itself is next to non-existent, so all we're then left with is the drama, which itself is perfectly functional, though that's not to say it's any good.
I'll have an egg salad sandwich and a glass of pineapple juice, please. Well, I might have to look for the juice. Won't you have, I'll wait.
That what you run that jalopy on? Pineapple juice?
Uh-huh.
The problem is that the movie lacks in any conviction to do anything compelling with our lead characters, which I will get onto shortly. The other problem is that nothing in this movie is done with any great agency, which is strange as this movie once again is supposed to be fast and furious. Everything that happens within this movie is done at a snail's pace, just plodding along, not really achieving much. Now one could put this down to direction, but the problem is that there's nothing really within the story that one could do at a brisk pace. The majority of scenes within this movie are our two lead actors together on set, not really saying much to one another. And when they do say something, it's usually something horrid. It's like driving to your grand's house on Christmas with your parents in the car. This isn't helped by the fact that our leading man within this movie isn't that compelling or that sympathetic of a character, and despite the fact we spend more time with Connie and that she has the promise of a far more interesting story arc, which itself is ended in the most infuriating way possible, the majority of our time spent within this movie is focused almost entirely on John Ireland's character, which makes sense as John Ireland also directed this movie, but it is a damn shame to have to spend so much time with this horrible, nasty character, as he isn't that likeable, he isn't that lovable, and he isn't a hero in the slightest.
Remember what I told you. Don't try anything.
Our lead character is a convicted murderer who in the opening moments of this movie beats up a police officer and leaves him for dead. He then kidnaps our leading lady, threatening her with violence at every turn. He beats her, he abuses her, he locks her in a cabin in the middle of nowhere so that she can't escape and inform the authorities. He does everything in his power to stop himself going back to prison at any cost, and he's generally just vulgar to everyone that he meets. And he's the killer here. He's supposed to be misunderstood. No, really.
Turned out I was bothering somebody. Guy who owned a lot of trucks. He tried everything. Undercut me, everything. But I figured I had my rights, so I stuck. And one of his drivers tried to run me off the road. All I was trying to do was keep from getting killed. And his truck went over the side.
And how can they accuse you of murder?
2 minutes later, one of his other drivers was there yelling his head off about how I drove his buddy over the cliff. He didn't even seem to care much that he was dead.
Why did you break out of jail? No jury in the world would convict you if you told them what happened.
If I got to a jury.
Yes, it turns out he didn't kill the guy that he's convicted of killing. It was all a put-up job. It was a conspiracy by the local trucking firm because he wouldn't play ball with them. And despite the fact that he did ram the guy off the road, he's innocent. He's totally innocent, despite the fact that the evidence was so compelling that it would send him down in the first place. And despite the fact you got a burning corpse over in the corner, it was all a put-up job, officer. I didn't do it. I mean, okay, I'd be willing to believe this guy was just misunderstood, that this really was just a put-up job that went horribly wrong. But with that said, this movie does nothing to prove otherwise. This movie does nothing to prove that this guy is a nice guy underneath. He's a horrible, nasty human being from beginning to end.
Mexico, huh?
They'll recognize you.
Not if you're a good girl. And if you are, when this is all over, you'll still be alive and beautiful.
You can't say this guy is a misunderstood rebel when the majority of his time within this movie has been spent beating and abusing a woman, when he's gone out of his way to ensure that he's not going back to prison at any cost. You can't create such an antagonistic character who has no morals, no ethics, no honour whatsoever, and make me think that he's a good guy when you've got nothing to prove that he is. You have no goddamn evidence. Not even something as small as him swerving out of the way to avoid an animal in the middle of the road. He has no honour. He has no goodness with him in. He just has a black heart.
It's a police car.
I've got a bullet for them and one for you.
The closest thing this guy gets to any kind of redemption is towards the end of the movie, where he goes to save a racer who's just crashed. Now that in itself isn't much, but at least it's something to prove that maybe underneath all the nastiness that he is actually a good guy deep down. The problem is that that crash that he's saving the guy from is one that he caused, so any kind of redemption that he would get from it is made null and void when you remember, oh yeah, he caused the crash, didn't he? So he's not redeeming himself at all. He's just making sure that he doesn't go back to prison for even longer or go sent straight to the electric chair. I mean, it's almost as though the writers got towards the end of this movie and realised, oh, bugger, we've done nothing to prove this guy isn't an arsehole. Quick, give me that pen. He goes back and says to the other racer, there we go, print it. I mean, really? What were they thinking? Now, the really crazy thing about our two lead characters is that the writers, in their infinite wisdom, decided to make them an item. Yes, of course.
Let go my arm.
I'll break it for you if you try any more tricks.
Okay, so it has to be Stockholm Syndrome. It can't be anything else. She can't really have fallen for this guy because he's horrible. He has no redeeming qualities. He's been abusive to her since day one. It has to be Stockholm Syndrome. It can't be anything else. I mean, could you imagine these two on Mr. and Mrs.?
I said I was sorry.
You're about the sorriest creature I've ever known.
Please leave me alone.
She goes from hating him to loving him without there really being much of a build-up in between. She even calls the cops on him towards the end of the movie, so that makes you think that the whole lovey-dovey side of her was just a ploy so that she could get him when he was at his most weakest. However, right at the end of the movie, she has the big, passionate embrace with him. I mean, what?
And it isn't too late.
For us, it's just the beginning.
Okay, so maybe the leathery, Comedy Dave looking caustic bad boy image is one that really gets women going. I wouldn't know because I'm not a woman, even though I have boobs, but still, you'd have to be pretty tapped in the head to just forget all the horrible, nasty things that he's done to her over the course of the movie. I mean, how does this work? I just can't get my head around it.
Great day for the race. You're beautiful in the morning.
Now, the real issue that I have with these two characters being an item is it makes Connie's story arc that little bit more troublesome. She starts this movie being a strong-willed, independently spirited woman with these great aspirations of becoming a race car driver, who over the course of the movie slowly has the fight beaten out of her, both literally and metaphorically, and she has her dreams of becoming a race car driver smashed before her very eyes without any good reason. The closest thing that we get to any kind of exclamation is just the old race car driver guy turning around to her and saying, "Oh well, we've decided that it's too dangerous for women drivers, and me and the guys got together last night and decided that women shouldn't take part in this race, and it's just darn too difficult."
Oh, Miss Constance Adair driving?
Yes.
Yes, I'm
Well,
right.
I guess you hadn't heard. They had a meeting last night. This course is too dangerous. All lady drivers are banned.
But I've got to.
I'm sorry, but that's what they decided.
I'll drive.
Oh, you're a racer, too.
Put me down.
Which itself is a bollocks excuse because over the course of the race, every other driver spins out at some point or another. The only race car driver that doesn't have some kind of crash is Frank. And over the course of that race sequence, we see Connie driving to try and stop Frank. And at no point does she swerve off or get into any difficulty, which is more than what can be said for all the other racers in this goddamn race. I mean, really, were they afraid that she was going to show them up or something? Or is this just a BS excuse so that we can give John Ireland a great big macho moment towards the end of the movie? And progressively as the movie goes on, she becomes an increasingly small character, both within her personality but also within her screen time within the movie itself. And by the end of the movie, she has all fight and all energy just kicked out of her. And at the end, she decides to shack up with the guy that's been abusing her for so long. You know, I'd say this movie was in some way misogynistic, but that would suggest that any kind of thought went into any of the character acts for anyone within this movie, negative or otherwise.
Well, I had to turn everything upside down, but I finally found... Well, where is everybody?
John Ireland's character of Frank does have something resembling a character arc, though that in itself is still poorly developed and undercooked to the extreme, and much like Connie's, it makes no sense in the grander scheme within the movie, and it comes totally out of left field. Right at the end of the movie, after he saved the guy from the car crash, he decides to give himself up. He's not going to race off to Mexico and to freedom, he's going to give up and try and clear his name, which... At no point does he ever suggest that he's even thinking about this in the entire movie, and the closest thing to a suggestion that we either get that that's even an option comes from Connie, and as soon as she mentions that, the entire idea is shot down by him. So the idea that he's gone from being this horrible, nasty, loathsome character to just a small 5-minute sequence where he's saving lives and deciding to do the good thing in the end just makes absolutely no sense.
You could have run away instead of helping him. Why didn't you?
Because you're right, Connie, and I'm going back.
It's almost as though they needed something just to round off his last-minute redemption at the end of the movie by making him give himself up at the end. But that in itself is so illogical. I mean, why stop there? Why not have him work in a soup kitchen or saving kittens from a house fire or discovering a cure to all known diseases? It would make just about as much sense as this.
Are you folks from the races? Sure would like to see them. Boy, that's a good-looking car. Luckily, I came by. You know, after sunset, the cops patrol the park, and they arrest you and pinch you.
So the big question, can I recommend it? Well, no. It's an intensely dry movie lacking in any thrills, the likes of which are hinted by the movie's title. It's not fast-paced or frenetic, it's just slow and fairly dull. Our leading lady is good, not fantastic, but she certainly is passable. But her and her character ultimately go nowhere. At least, well, nowhere nice. And the angle of her being a female racing driver in a male-dominated sport is interesting, but sadly that entire thread is thrown away rather ignominiously, and her arc treated with near contempt all the way through. And as for our leading man, he's just simply unlikable, and that's it. As a whole entity, this movie is just horribly underdeveloped in all areas. The characters go nowhere, the story grinds to a halt as soon as it picks up in any speed, and we have the one single chase sequence that goes on way too long than it needs to. All in all, it's a poorly thought through entity lacking in any intrigue at all, be that in its plot, its characters, or as a piece of cinema. So there we have it, The Fast and the Furious, an absolute chore of a movie to sit through from start to finish. Now this movie's plot was reused in the 1994 movie The Chase, starring Charlie Sheen, which I'm sure is a fun, happy adventure for all the family. Now if you excuse me, I'm going to build myself a voodoo doll of Roger Corman and stick nasty big pins into it. Goodbye!
Boy, that's a good-looking car.